The scout ship shuddered as it entered the outer edges of Epsilon 9's unstable field. Ethan gripped the armrests of his seat tightly, trying to steady himself against the turbulence. Beside him, Mia Torres kept her eyes fixed on the controls, her hands moving deftly across the console as she adjusted the ship's trajectory. The star loomed ahead of them, its surface roiling with violent flares that lit up the cockpit in bursts of orange and red. "This is insane," Mia muttered under her breath, though her tone was calm. "We're flying straight into a death trap." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He knew she was right. The closer they got to Epsilon 9, the more dangerous it became. But turning back wasn't an option. If their plan failed, the Empire would win. Millions, maybe billions of lives depended on what they were about to attempt. "Just focus on getting us close enough," Ethan said finally, his voice steady despite the knot of fear twisting in his stomach. "Once we deploy the device, we'll have a few minutes to get clear before the chain reaction starts." Mia glanced at him briefly, then nodded. A few minutes might not be enough. "This star's already acting like it wants to explode on its own." "I know," Ethan replied quietly. He didn't need reminding. Every reading he'd taken confirmed how volatile Epsilon 9 had become. The star was a ticking time bomb, and all they could do was try to control the blast rather than prevent it entirely. As the ship drew nearer, the turbulence worsened. Alarms blared intermittently, warning of rising radiation levels and fluctuating gravity fields. Ethan ignored them, focusing instead on the small device strapped to his side. It was deceptively simple looking, little more than a metal box with blinking lights and wires snaking out of it. Yet inside was the culmination of weeks of research, a mechanism designed to trigger a controlled electromagnetic pulse within the star's core. Lily's voice crackled over the comm system, breaking. Through the tension. "How's it going out there?" "We're almost in position," Ethan answered, leaning toward the microphone. "Just hold your ships ready. Once the EMP hits, Hayes's fleet will be disabled, but only for a short time. You'll need to act fast." "Understood," Lily replied. Her tone was firm, but Ethan could hear the strain beneath it. She was carrying the weight of the entire rebellion on her shoulders, just as he was carrying the weight of this mission. Behind them, the rest of the rebel fleet waited in the shadow of the Crimson Veil, hidden from Imperial sensors by the dense gas clouds. They were counting on Ethan and Mia to pull this off. If they failed, the rebels would be sitting ducks once Commander Hayes realized their location. Finally, the scout ship reached the designated coordinates. Mia brought the vessel to a halt, hovering just outside the star's most turbulent zone. Outside the viewport, the fiery surface of Epsilon 9 churned violently, sending waves of energy rippling outward. Ethan unstrapped himself from his seat and moved to the rear compartment where the deployment equipment was stored. "You sure you want to do this yourself?" Mia asked, glancing back at him. "I can help." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You're better off staying here, ready to fly us out. Besides, if something goes wrong." He trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. They both knew the risks involved. Mia hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." Ethan grabbed the device and a magnetic anchor, securing the latter to his belt. Then, taking a deep breath, he stepped into the airlock. The outer door slid open, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. Heat radiated from the star, even through the ship's shielding, making sweat bead on Ethan's forehead. He activated his suit's thrusters and pushed off gently, floating toward the edge of the star's atmosphere. The journey felt endless, though it lasted only a few moments. With each passing second, the heat intensified, and the radiation readings on his suit's display climbed higher. Ethan fought to keep his breathing steady, focusing on the task ahead. He couldn't afford to panic now. When he reached the target site, a weak point in the star's magnetic field identified during his earlier calculations, he anchored himself to the surface using the magnetic clamp. His gloved hands trembled slightly as he attached the device to the anchor, ensuring it was secure. Then, with careful precision, he activated the countdown sequence. "Device is live," Ethan reported over the comm. 30 seconds until detonation." "Copy that," Lily responded. "We're standing by." Ethan turned to look back at the scout ship, its silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of the glowing star. Mia was watching him through the cockpit window, her face pale but determined. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. Without her skill and courage, none of this would have been possible. Then, suddenly, alarms blared in his helmet. A massive flare erupted from the star's surface, sending a shockwave hurtling toward him. Ethan braced himself, holding onto the anchor with both hands as the force of the explosion threatened to tear him loose. Sparks flew from the device and one of the indicator lights flickered ominously. "What's happening?" Lily demanded. "There's interference," Ethan shouted, struggling to maintain his grip. "The flare destabilized the device. Can you fix it?" Mia called out. "I don't know," Ethan replied, his voice strained. He reached for the device, trying to stabilize it manually. The timer continued to count down, now showing 20 seconds remaining. 10, 5. With a final burst of effort, Ethan managed to reset the connection, restoring the device's functionality. The timer resumed its countdown, and Ethan let out a shaky breath of relief. "It's working again," he said quickly. "Get ready to move, we've got less than 10 seconds left." He released the anchor and activated his thrusters, propelling himself back toward the scout ship. Behind him, the star began to pulse erratically, its energy building toward the inevitable release. As Ethan reached the airlock, Mia pulled him inside, slamming the door shut behind him. "Go, go!" Ethan yelled, collapsing into his seat. Mia didn't hesitate. She fired up the engines and sent the ship rocketing away from Epsilon 9, pushing it to maximum speed. Just as they cleared the star's outer layers, a brilliant flash of light illuminated the cockpit. The electromagnetic pulse surged outward, engulfing everything in its path. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, the chaos subsided. The Imperial fleet signals disappeared from the scanners, their systems disabled by the EMP. Cheers erupted over the comm system as the rebels celebrated their temporary victory. But Ethan's relief was short-lived. Through the viewport, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. Epsilon 9's surface was still churning, its instability growing worse by the second. The star hadn't exploded yet, but it was dangerously close. "We did it," Mia said, softly, her voice tinged with awe. "You actually did it." Ethan shook his head grimly. "Not completely. That star's still going to go supernova, and soon. We bought ourselves some time, but not much." Mia fell silent, her expression sobering. "What do we do now?" Ethan stared at the dying star, his mind racing. There was no easy answer. All they could do was warn everyone, rebels and Imperials alike, and hope they listened. "Now," he said quietly, "we run." The Crimson Veil was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. From the viewport of the rebel ship Liberty's Call, it looked like a massive cloud of swirling red and orange gases, stretching endlessly across space. The colors shifted and danced, as though alive, casting an eerie glow on everything around them. It was beautiful in a haunting way, but Ethan knew better than to be distracted by its appearance. This nebula wasn't just a hiding spot, it was their last hope. Ryan Dawson, the captain of the Liberty's Call, stood beside Ethan, his arms crossed as he gazed out at the veil. Ryan was younger than Ethan expected for someone in charge of such a critical mission, with sharp features and dark hair that fell messily over his forehead. Despite his age, there was an air of confidence about him, a quiet authority that made people listen when he spoke. "This place is dangerous," Ryan said finally, breaking the silence. "Navigating through the veil isn't easy. The gas clouds interfere with sensors, and we've got pockets of radiation scattered everywhere. One wrong move and we're all dead?" Ethan nodded slowly. He'd read about the veil before. It was infamous among pilots for being nearly impossible to traverse safely. But it also offered something invaluable: cover. The dense gases blocked most scans, making it nearly invisible to outsiders. For rebels on the run, it was the perfect refuge. "We don't have much choice," Ethan replied. "If Commander Hayes finds us, we're finished anyway." Ryan glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Most people would have cracked under this kind of pressure." Ethan didn't respond. Truthfully, he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold himself together. The weight of everything, the Empire, Project Solaris, Epsilon 9, was crushing him. But giving up wasn't an option. Not now. Not when so many lives depended on what they did next. Inside the ship, chaos reigned. Rebels rushed back and forth securing equipment, checking weapons and preparing for whatever might come next. Lily moved among them, her voice calm but firm as she issued orders. She seemed completely in her element here, a natural leader who inspired loyalty without needing to demand it. Ethan watched her from a distance, marveling at how different she was from the little sister he remembered growing up with. Back then, she'd been all laughter and mischief. Now, she carried the weight of the rebellion on her shoulders. Grace, meanwhile, stayed close to Ethan. She hadn't spoken much since they left the moon, but her presence was comforting. When the two of them found a quiet corner away from the bustle, she finally broke the silence. "You okay?" she asked, her tone soft. "As okay as anyone can be in this situation," Ethan admitted. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a shaky breath. "I keep thinking about what happens if we fail. If the Empire gets their hands on Epsilon 9. "They won't," Grace interrupted firmly. "Not while we're still breathing." Her certainty surprised him. He wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered in the back of his mind. The Empire had resources and firepower beyond anything the rebels could muster. How could they possibly stand against that? Before he could respond, Mia Torres approached them. She was a navigator, one of the best in the rebel fleet, and her skills were the reason they'd made it to the Veil in one piece. Her dark eyes scanned the room briefly before settling on Ethan. "Captain Dawson wants to see you," she said. "He's putting together a plan, and he thinks your expertise might help." Ethan hesitated. "My expertise?" Mia nodded. "You're the one who figured out what the Empire's doing with Epsilon 9. That makes you important. Come on, I'll take you to him." She led them to a small meeting room where Ryan was already waiting, along with Lily and a few other key members of the rebel leadership. A holographic map of the surrounding region hovered above the table, showing the positions of Imperial ships closing in on their location. "All right," Ryan began, addressing the group. "Here's the situation. Hayes knows we're here, or at least he suspects we are. His fleet is moving into position to surround the Veil. Once they do, we're trapped." "What are our options?" Lily asked. Ryan gestured to the map. "We fight, or we die. Those are the only choices. But if we're going to fight, we need a strategy, something bold enough to catch them off guard." "That's where I come in?" Ethan guessed. Ryan nodded. "Exactly. You know more about Epsilon 9 than anyone else here. Is there any way we can use the star against them? Anything we can do to disrupt their plans?" Ethan frowned, thinking hard. He hadn't considered using the star itself as a weapon, not until now. Slowly, an idea began to form in his mind. "There might be a way," he said cautiously. "If we trigger a controlled chain reaction within Epsilon 9's core, we could create a localized electromagnetic pulse. It wouldn't destroy the star outright, but it would disable every ship in range, including Hayes's fleet." The room fell silent as everyone processed what he'd said. Finally, Lily spoke up. "That sounds risky. What happens if the chain reaction spins out of control?" "It shouldn't," Ethan replied. "But I can't guarantee it. There's always a chance the star could destabilize further." "And if it does?" Ryan pressed. "Then it goes. Supernova," Ethan admitted. "And we're all dead?" Lily exchanged a glance with Ryan, who sighed heavily. "It's a gamble," he said, "but maybe it's the only shot we've got." Over the next few hours, the rebels worked tirelessly to prepare for the operation. Ethan spent most of his time poring over calculations, double-checking every detail to minimize the risk of failure. Grace stayed by his side, offering input whenever she could. Together they fine-tuned the plan, ensuring that every variable was accounted for. Meanwhile, tensions ran high throughout the ship. Many rebels questioned whether the plan would work, or if Ethan could even be trusted. Rumors spread quickly, fueled by fear and uncertainty. Some accused him of being a spy, sent by the Empire to sabotage their efforts. Others simply doubted his ability to pull off such a complex task. Among the skeptics was Kyle Bennett, a hot-headed fighter pilot known for his aggressive tactics. He confronted Ethan in the middle of the engineering bay, his face flushed with anger. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Kyle snapped. "You're just a scientist playing soldier. What makes you think you can save us?" Ethan met his gaze steadily. "Because I don't have a choice. Neither do you." Kyle opened his mouth to retort, but Lily stepped between them, her expression stern. "Enough," she said sharply. "We don't have time for this. If you've got a problem with Ethan, take it up after we survive." Kyle glared at her but backed down, muttering under his breath as he stormed off. Lily turned to Ethan, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't let him get to you," she said. "He's scared, same as everyone else. Just focus on the mission." Ethan nodded, though the encounter left him shaken. He knew Kyle wasn't the only one who doubted him. Winning their trust wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't impossible either. As the hours ticked by, the rebels finalized their preparations. The Liberty's Call and several smaller vessels were loaded with supplies and armed to the teeth. Pilots reviewed flight paths, engineers checked systems, and soldiers sharpened their blades. Everyone understood what was at stake. When the time came to launch, Ethan joined Mia in the cockpit of one of the scout ships. She gave him a reassuring smile as she powered up the engines. "Ready for this?" she asked. Ethan took a deep breath, gripping the edge of his seat. "Ready as I'll ever be." With that, the fleet surged forward, disappearing into the depths of the Crimson Veil. Ahead of them lay danger, uncertainty, and perhaps, just maybe, a chance to turn the tide against the Empire. The starfield stretched endlessly before Ethan Carter, its glittering expanse both beautiful and cold. He sat in the dimly lit observation deck of the Aurora Dawn, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of his tablet. The hum of machinery filled the air around him, a constant reminder that he was far from home, far from Earth, far from everything familiar. His eyes shifted to the screen in front of him, where streams of data scrolled past like an endless river. It was fascinating work, but it weighed heavily on him tonight. Ethan wasn't just any engineer. He was part of a specialized team assigned to study Epsilon 9, a dying star located at the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy. For weeks now, the crew had been monitoring its erratic behavior, noting how its energy output fluctuated unpredictably. Scientists back on Earth theorized that Epsilon 9 might go supernova within months, or even weeks if their calculations were wrong. But for Ethan, this wasn't just another research project. This star held secrets, ones that could change everything. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss, pulling him out of his thoughts. Dr. Grace Monroe stepped inside, her silver hair catching the faint glow of the overhead lights. She carried herself with authority, though there was kindness in her voice when she spoke. "Still working late, I see," she said, glancing at the tablet in front of him. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan replied without looking up. "Too much on my mind." Grace moved closer, peering over his shoulder at the graphs and charts displayed on the screen. Her brow furrowed slightly as she took in the details. "You've been diving deep into these readings," she remarked. "Anything interesting?" Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to share what he'd found. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "There's something unusual about the core composition of Epsilon 9, he admitted. "I've detected trace elements we haven't seen before. They seem to amplify the star's instability." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Amplify? That's troubling." "It gets worse," Ethan continued. "If someone wanted to weaponize this star, say by triggering its collapse, they could do catastrophic damage. Entire planets would be wiped out." Grace frowned deeply, her expression darkening. "That sounds like speculation. Are you sure about this?" "I'm not imagining things," Ethan insisted. "Look at the numbers yourself, and then tell me I'm wrong." She studied the data silently for a moment, her lips pressed into a Thin line. When she finally looked up, her tone was serious. "This stays between us, Ethan. If word gets out, especially to the Empire..." He nodded grimly. The Galactic Empire loomed large over everyone's lives, its iron grip tightening with each passing year. They controlled resources, trade routes, entire systems, and they didn't hesitate to crush anyone who opposed them. Rumors of secret projects designed to harness cosmic phenomena had circulated for years, but no one dared to speak openly about such things, not unless they wanted trouble. As if summoned by his thoughts, Ethan's personal communicator buzzed, softly. He glanced down at the screen and froze. A message from Lily, his younger sister, had come through. She rarely contacted him directly, knowing how risky it was. The Empire monitored all communications, and any hint of rebellion could mean imprisonment or worse. "What is it?" Grace asked, noticing his sudden tension. "Nothing important," Ethan lied quickly, closing the message window. He couldn't risk involving Grace, not yet. Whatever Lily wanted to say, it would have to wait until he was alone. Later that night, Ethan retreated to his quarters, sealing the door securely behind him. He activated the encryption protocols on his device before opening Lily's message again. Her face appeared on the small screen, pale but determined. Her voice was barely above a whisper, distorted slightly by static. "Ethan, I need your help," she began. "We know about Project Solaris. You're closer to the truth than anyone else. Don't trust the Empire. They'll use Epsilon 9 to destroy entire worlds if they can. We don't have much time." Her words sent a chill down his spine. Project Solaris, it was real. Worse still, Lily was involved with the rebellion, a fact she'd kept hidden from him until now. He felt torn between pride and fear. Pride because she was brave enough to stand against tyranny, and fear because he knew the risks she was taking. For hours, Ethan paced his room, replaying her message in his head. Should he act? Could he really sit idly by while the Empire plotted devastation on a galactic scale? He thought about Grace's warning earlier, about keeping quiet. Yet silence felt like complicity. Every instinct screamed at him to do something, anything, to stop what was coming. By morning, Ethan had made up his mind. He would dig deeper into the star's properties, uncover whatever evidence he could find. If the Empire truly intended to weaponize Epsilon 9, he needed proof, not just theories or conjecture. Only then could he decide his next move. But as he returned to the observation deck, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Was he ready for what lay ahead? Once he crossed this line, there would be no turning back. Ethan spent the next several days consumed by his work, barely sleeping or eating as he pored over the data streaming in from Epsilon 9. The star's behavior grew increasingly erratic, its energy flares more violent than ever before. Each new reading added to the mounting evidence that something unnatural was happening within its core. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the Empire was somehow involved, though he didn't yet have concrete proof. Still, every instinct told him to keep digging. Dr. Grace Monroe noticed the change in him almost immediately. Gone was the cautious, methodical scientist she had come to know. In his place stood a man driven by urgency, his eyes darting between screens and charts with an intensity that bordered on obsession. One afternoon, as Ethan adjusted the sensors on the observation deck, Grace approached him with a concerned expression. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said gently. "Whatever you're chasing, it won't do anyone any good if you burn out." Ethan glanced up briefly but didn't stop working. "I don't have a choice," he replied. "If I'm right about this, if the Empire is tampering with Epsilon 9, then we're running out of time." Grace sighed, crossing her arms. "You've been saying that for days now, but you haven't shown me anything definitive. Do you even know what you're looking for?" "I think so," Ethan muttered, scrolling through another set of readings. "There's a pattern here, hidden beneath the chaos. Something artificial." Grace frowned. "Artificial? You mean like interference? Manipulation?" "Exactly." He tapped the screen emphatically. "Look at these spikes in radiation levels. They're too precise to be natural. Someone or something is triggering them deliberately." Grace studied the data silently for a moment, her brow furrowing. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, let's say you're onto something. What's your plan? Are you going to confront the Empire with this? No, Ethan said firmly. Not yet. If I go public without solid evidence, they'll just deny it, or worse, silence me. I need to gather more information first. Grace hesitated, clearly uneasy. Be careful, Ethan. You're playing a dangerous game. The Empire doesn't tolerate loose ends. Her words lingered in his mind long after she left the observation deck. She was right, of course. The Empire thrived on control, and anyone who threatened that control was dealt with swiftly and mercilessly. But Ethan couldn't afford to back down now, not when lives were at stake. As the hours passed, Ethan became more convinced that he was on the verge of a breakthrough. He isolated specific anomalies in the star's emissions, cross-referencing them with older records stored in the Aurora Dawn's database. Slowly but surely, a clearer picture began to emerge. It wasn't just random interference, it was deliberate manipulation, designed to destabilize Epsilon 9 further. Whoever was behind it wanted the star to collapse, and soon. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about studying a dying star anymore. This was about stopping a weapon of unimaginable destruction. And Ethan knew exactly where to start looking for answers. That night, Ethan accessed classified files stored deep within the ship's secure systems. These files contained detailed reports on Project Solaris, the rumored initiative aimed at harnessing cosmic phenomena for military purposes. Accessing them required bypassing multiple layers of encryption, a task that would normally take weeks. But desperation fueled Ethan's determination, and after hours of painstaking effort, he finally cracked the code. What he found inside chilled him to the bone. The documents confirmed everything Lily had warned him about. Project Solaris wasn't just theoretical, it was real, and it was already underway. According to the files, the Empire had been experimenting with ways to accelerate stellar collapse, using advanced technology to trigger supernovae on command. Epsilon 9 was their latest target, chosen because of its proximity to rebel-controlled territories. Ethan's hands trembled as he read through the details. The implications were staggering. If successful, the Empire could obliterate entire planets in a single blast, wiping out resistance movements across the galaxy. Worse still, there was no mention of safeguards or limitations. Once unleashed, such power would be impossible to control. For a moment, Ethan considered deleting the files entirely. Destroying the evidence might buy him time, but it wouldn't solve the problem. The Empire would simply continue their experiments elsewhere, targeting other stars, other systems. No, he needed to act decisively. But how? His communicator buzzed again, interrupting his thoughts. Another encrypted message from Lily. This time she sounded frantic. They know you're onto them, she said, her voice strained. The Empire has sent reinforcements to your location. You need to get off that ship. Now. Ethan's heart sank. How had they found out? Had someone tipped them off? Or had his unauthorized access to the classified files triggered some kind of alert? Either way, he was running out of options. He quickly gathered the data he'd collected, transferring it onto a portable drive for safekeeping. Then, moving as quietly as possible, he made his way to the docking bay. Along the way, he encountered Dr. Grace Monroe, who seemed surprised to see him. "Where are you going?" she asked, eyeing the device in his hand. "I can't explain, right now," Ethan replied urgently. "But if you value your life, stay away from me." Grace grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Whatever trouble you're in, you don't have to face it alone. Let me help." Ethan hesitated, torn between gratitude and caution. Trusting Grace meant risking her safety, but leaving her behind felt wrong. After a brief pause, he nodded, reluctantly. "Fine, but you'll need to move fast." Together, they reached the docking bay just as alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed overhead, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Imperial troops had arrived, storming. The Aurora Dawn with weapons drawn. Shouts echoed down the corridors as soldiers searched for intruders. Ethan and Grace slipped into one of the smaller escape pods, sealing the hatch behind them. As the pod detached from the ship and drifted into space, Ethan watched through the viewport as Imperial vessels surrounded the Aurora Dawn. Commander Logan Hayes himself led the operation, his imposing figure visible through the bridge windows. "He's ruthless," Grace whispered, recognizing the officer. "If he catches us—" "He won't," Ethan interrupted, his voice firm, despite the fear gnawing at him. "We'll find a way to fight back, together." As the escape pod hurtled toward the nearest rebel outpost, Ethan clutched the portable drive tightly in his hand. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. The Empire had underestimated him, and they were about to regret it. The escape pod jolted violently as it re-entered the atmosphere of a nearby moon, its heat shield glowing red-hot against the friction. Inside, Ethan gripped the edges of his seat, his knuckles white with tension. Beside him, Grace sat rigid, her face pale but resolute. Neither of them spoke as the small craft shuddered and groaned, finally slowing down enough to descend into the thick clouds that blanketed the surface below. When the pod touched down with a hard thud, Ethan let out a shaky breath. He glanced at Grace, who nodded silently, and together they opened the hatch. The air outside was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of sulfur. A dense fog swirled around their feet, making visibility poor. They were alone, for now, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last long. The Empire would be searching for them, and this moon wasn't exactly a safe haven. "We need to move," Ethan said quietly, adjusting the strap of the portable drive slung over his shoulder. "If we stay here, they'll find us." Grace nodded, again pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "Do you even know where we're going?" "Not exactly," Ethan admitted. "But Lily mentioned a rebel outpost near here. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." Without waiting for further discussion, they began trudging through the foggy terrain. The ground beneath their boots was uneven, littered with jagged rocks and patches of slippery moss. Every step felt precarious, every sound amplified by the eerie silence of the moon. Ethan kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting Imperial forces to emerge from the mist at any moment. After what felt like hours, they stumbled upon a narrow ravine carved into the landscape. At the bottom flowed a sluggish stream of dark water, its surface reflecting the dim light filtering through the clouds above. Ethan hesitated at the edge, scanning the area for signs of danger. "This way," he whispered, motioning for Grace to follow him down the slope. She hesitated briefly before nodding and carefully picking her way after him. The descent was treacherous, but they managed to reach the stream without incident. Once there, Ethan crouched low, examining the muddy banks for tracks or other clues. "What are you looking for?" Grace asked, her voice barely audible. "Signs of activity," Ethan replied. "If the rebels are close, they'll leave traces. Footprints, discarded supplies, anything." Grace frowned. "And if they aren't?" "What?" Then Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, running his fingers along the damp earth until he spotted something promising. A faint impression in the mud, shaped like the sole of a boot. It was fresh, no more than a few hours old. His pulse quickened. "They've been here," he said, standing up. "We're on the right path." Grace exhaled sharply, relief washing over her features. "Thank goodness. Let's keep moving." They followed the stream deeper into the ravine, sticking close to the shadows cast by the towering cliffs on either side. The farther they went, the thicker the fog became, until it seemed to swallow everything whole. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, and still they pressed onward. Finally, just as exhaustion began to take its toll, they heard voices ahead, low and cautious, carried faintly on the wind. Ethan froze, holding up a hand to signal Grace to stop. He strained his ears, trying to make out the words. They weren't speaking standard Galactic. Instead, it sounded like a mix of dialects used by rebel factions. Hope surged within him. "They're rebels," he murmured, turning to Grace. "Stay behind me, let me handle this." Before she could protest, Ethan stepped forward, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. As he rounded a bend in the ravine, He came face to face with three figures clad in mismatched armor and carrying makeshift weapons. Their expressions shifted instantly from suspicion to hostility, and one of them, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, raised a blaster toward Ethan. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice sharp. "How did you find us?" "My name is Ethan Carter," Ethan replied calmly, keeping his tone steady despite the weapon pointed at him. "I'm here to see Lily Carter. She sent me." The mention of Lily's name caused a ripple of surprise among the group. The scarred man lowered his blaster slightly, exchanging glances with his companions. "Lily doesn't trust outsiders lightly," he said. "Prove you're telling the truth." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip, the same one Lily had given him months ago during one of their rare meetings. It contained encrypted messages meant only for her eyes, a fail-safe in case of emergencies. He held it up for the rebels to see. "This should do it." The scarred man studied the chip for a moment before nodding to one of his comrades, who stepped forward to inspect it. After a brief pause, the second rebel gave a curt nod. "It's hers," he confirmed. The tension eased slightly, though the rebels remained wary. The scarred man gestured for Ethan and Grace to follow them. "Come with us," he said. "Lily, we'll want to hear your story." The journey to the rebel outpost took another hour, during which Ethan and Grace were flanked closely by their escorts. The terrain grew rougher, the ravine widening into a vast canyon dotted with crumbling ruins. The rebels moved with practiced ease, navigating the obstacles effortlessly. Ethan couldn't help but admire their resourcefulness, even as fatigue weighed heavily on him. Eventually, they arrived at the entrance to an underground bunker hidden beneath a collapsed stone archway. The rebels ushered them inside, where flickering lights illuminated a series of tunnels reinforced with salvaged metal beams. The air was cool and stale, tinged with the smell of oil and burnt wiring. Voices echoed faintly in the distance, accompanied by the hum of generators. They were led to a large chamber serving as the command center. Maps and schematics covered the walls, while clusters of rebels worked feverishly at consoles and terminals. In the middle of it all stood Lily Carter, her fiery red hair tied back in a ponytail, her green eyes flashing with intensity. When she saw Ethan, her expression softened, though only slightly. "Ethan," she said, stepping forward. "You made it." "Barely," Ethan replied, managing a weak smile. "The Empire knows we're onto them. They attacked the Aurora Dawn." Lily's jaw tightened. "I figured as much. Did you bring the data?" Ethan nodded, handing her the portable drive. "Everything I found. Project Solaris, it's real, Lily. They're planning to use Epsilon 9 as a weapon." Lily took the drive, her hands trembling slightly as she examined it. "Then we don't have much time. If we don't act soon, they'll trigger the supernova, and millions will die." Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A young rebel burst into the room, breathless and wide-eyed. "Commander Hayes is here," he exclaimed. "His fleet just entered orbit." Panic rippled through the chamber as rebels scrambled to prepare for battle. Lily grabbed Ethan's arm, her grip firm. "We need to evacuate now." "But where do we go?" Grace asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Lily's gaze hardened. "There's only one place left. The Crimson Veil." She turned to address the gathered rebels. "Prepare the ships. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Spread the word. We're not letting the Empire win this fight." As chaos unfolded around them, Ethan felt a surge of determination. The Empire thought they had won, but they underestimated the resilience of those who refused to bow. Together, with Lily leading the charge, they would find a way to fight back and, maybe, just maybe, save the galaxy from destruction.